Hostile nations like Russia, the People's Republic of China, Iran, and North Korea, and cyber criminals around the world continue to sharpen their tactics and create more adverse consequences. Their ransomware attacks target our financial institutions, hospitals, pipelines, electric grids, and water treatment plants, attempting to wreak havoc on our daily lives. They exploit the integrated global cyber ecosystem to sow discord, undermine democracy, and erode trust in our institutions, public and private. These cyber operations threaten the economic and national security of every American and many others around the world. In particular, China is using its technology to tilt the global playing field to its benefit. They leverage sophisticated cyber capabilities to gain access to the intellectual property, data, and infrastructure of American individuals and businesses. Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine intensified the risk of a cyber attack, impacting our critical infrastructure earlier this year. Nation-state aggression is creating a heightened risk of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear-related threats to Americans as well. While fast-emerging technologies like unmanned aerial systems, artificial intelligence, internet communications, and cryptocurrencies are helping societies be more productive, creative, and entrepreneurial, they also are introducing new risks. Transnational criminal organizations are deploying these technologies to commit a wide array of crimes as they continue to grow in size, scale, sophistication, and lethality. With respect to unmanned aerial systems in particular, it is vital that Congress act before the end of this year to extend our CUAS authorities in order to protect the American people from malicious drone activity.
On top of that, countries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are growing more aggressive, brazen, and capable. They're coming at us from all angles to undermine our core democratic institutions, our national security, and our rule of law. Of those countries, the greatest long-term threat to our nation's ideas, innovation, and economic security, our national security, is that from China. The Chinese government aspires to equal or surpass the U.S. as a global superpower and influence the world with a value system shaped by undemocratic, authoritarian ideals. But we are confronting that threat head-on. Just 3 weeks ago, for example, we unsealed charges against 13 individuals, 10 of them Chinese intelligence officers and government officials, for a variety of criminal efforts to exert influence right here in the U.S. to benefit Beijing. And the FBI has scores of investigations open into the China threat in all 56 of our field offices. On the cyber front, China's vast hacking program is the world's largest, and they have stolen more of Americans' personal and business data than every other nation combined. But of course, China is not our only challenge in cyberspace, not even close. The FBI's cyber investigations are growing in frequency, scale, and complexity consistent with the evolution of the threat. We're investigating over 100 different ransomware variants, and each one of those with scores of victims, as well as a whole host of other novel threats posed by both cyber criminals and nation states alike. And it's becoming more and more difficult to discern where the cyber criminal activity ends and the nation-state activity begins as the line between those two continues to blur.
I'm going to read a statement. This is for all the witnesses. Late last month, Forbes and other press reported that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, planned to use TikTok to monitor the physical location of specific Americans for the purposes of surveilling individual U.S. citizens. And as you know, TikTok is close to signing a CFIUS contract, and the Treasury Department's been assessing the national security risk of the foreign ownership of TikTok, including its CCP ties, and whether the platform enables the Chinese government to access U.S. persons' data. The first question is a yes or no. It's, do you assess that TikTok is a significant national security threat given the accusations that the company specifically targets U.S. persons, and given the ByteDance and TikTok ties to the CCP? And the second part of that question is yes or no. Is the CCP leveraging the application as a tool to collect information about U.S. citizens for purposes other than targeted ads and content? Anyone on the panel?
Congresswoman, taking the first question, I would say we do have national security concerns, at least from the FBI's end, about TikTok. They include the possibility that the Chinese government could use it to control data collection on millions of users, or control the recommendation algorithm, which could be used for influence operations if they so chose, or to control software on millions of devices, which gives the opportunity to potentially technically compromise personal devices. So there's a number of concerns there. As to what is actually happening and actually being done, that's probably something that would be better addressed in a closed classified setting, and I could see what information we might be able to share that way, but there's probably not much more than I could add to that, other than to say it is certainly something that's on our radar, and we share your concerns.
Yes, thank you for that, and I'd love to have that closed briefing. Has ByteDance responded to allegations that their internal auditing system specifically targeted any members of the U.S. government, activists, public figures, or journalists, yes or no?
I'll have to see if we can get back to you on that. I'm not sure that I can give the answer right here at this moment.
Okay. Are you informing the Treasury's view through the CFIUS process of the national security threat it poses?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Sir?
Could you repeat the question? I just couldn't hear you very well.
Are you informing Treasury's view through the CFIUS process of the national security threat it poses to the United States?
Yes, the FBI's Foreign Investment Unit, working through the Department of Justice, is part of the CFIUS process and would be relevant. Our input would be taken into account in any agreements that might be made to address the issue.
Okay, last part of that question is, what is currently being done to investigate the CCP's involvement in TikTok ownership, direction, and or access? And the reason I asked that is there was a current 60-minute segment highlighting the stark differences between the Chinese-owned TikTok company that allows kids in China to view a totally different app, a clean app, and what is shown in the U.S., they call it an opium version, that is designed to hook American children on an unsafe version of the video-based platform, and offering a healthier version and a limited viewing of 40 minutes for those children in China, which is unacceptable, and parents need to know this. But what's currently being done to investigate the CCP's involvement in TikTok?
Well, as to any specific investigative work, I could see whether some of that could be incorporated into the classified briefing I referred to. There's obviously limits on what I can share in terms of discussing a specific ongoing investigation. But what I would say is that you've highlighted two very, very important threats. One, of course, something we're all concerned about, which is the threat to our youth online. But the second is the threat specifically from the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, and the ways in which their laws are used as an aggressive weapon against companies, both U.S. companies and Chinese companies. Under Chinese law, Chinese companies are required to essentially, and I'm going to shorthand here, basically do whatever the Chinese government wants them to in terms of sharing information or serving as a tool of the Chinese government. And so that's plenty of reason by itself to be extremely concerned.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to the classified briefing, and I appreciate your time. And with that, Chairman, I yield back.
Secretary Mayorkas, I wanted to ask you a question about Coast Guard operations. Our country faces many pressing threats across the domestic and international landscape, several of which we've discussed here today, obviously. However, we must not lose track of threats we face over the long term, such as increased aggression by China and Russia within international waters. China is aggressively pursuing increased influence across the Indo-Pacific, and a Coast Guard cutter recently found Chinese-Russian ships carrying out joint maneuvers in the Arctic, less than 100 miles off of Alaska. Mr. Secretary, how important to the U.S. interests are the Coast Guard's efforts to counter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific and maintain a rule-based maritime order? And likewise, how critical are the Coast Guard's plans to build and acquire new icebreakers to enable increased maritime presence in the Arctic?
Congresswoman, thank you very much. It is vitally important that our United States Coast Guard be fully resourced to address what we all today have described, and accurately so, as an only increasing threat from China and other adverse nation states. I was actually in Singapore and Japan several weeks ago to speak about the need to enhance our security partnerships, and one of the main lines of effort in my bilateral discussions was, in fact, increased cooperation with our United States Coast Guard to address the increasing threat in the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, the United States Coast Guard also has an Arctic strategy that it is executing, and that Arctic strategy includes increasing its aging fleet and replacing some of its most aged vessels. And so we look forward to Congress's support for that necessary funding.
Are there any other resources that we should be considering to support you in that endeavor?
Congresswoman, we of course have presented our fiscal year 2023 budget, which includes much needed resourcing of the United States Coast Guard. We do hope that our budget is implemented very quickly. Every day that passes fails to advance our security mission, and we are, of course, working on our budget plans for the years beyond.
Earlier this summer, Canada became the last member of Five Eyes intelligence pooling alliance to bar or restrict the use of Huawei equipment within its 5G telecom network. In addition, Canada's ban also includes equipment made by ZTE, which is one of China's biggest tech companies and one that is state-owned. The United States and Canada work in partnership at and beyond our borders to enhance security, sharing critical infrastructure. So it's critically important that the U.S. can trust Canada's or any other of our allies' 5G equipment and software will not threaten our national security, economic security, and privacy, or intellectual property. As the world becomes increasingly connected via the rise of 5G networks, how can vulnerabilities brought on by other nations' 5G networks, such as those with Huawei equipment, how can we make sure they don't pose a national security risk?
Congressman, your question is so very important. Let me share with you. Number one, Canada is a very, very close security partner with us. We have a robust information sharing architecture with them. They are one of the participants in our regular dialogues in the area that you have identified, and in so many other homeland and national security areas. I was just in Singapore about 3 weeks ago, speaking about the very issue that you've identified, and really communicating a very clear and stark call to countries in the Indo-Pacific region about the vulnerabilities that are created when we allow China, the People's Republic of China, to control some of the architecture.
Can I ask you what their response?
Such as 5G.
What was their response when you brought that? Because we're already doing it, but our allies, you know, there's some of them that aren't doing it, and some of them that will have not updated. You know, they put these plans in place and they haven't updated current infrastructure with Huawei technology.
Congressman, it is our responsibility to communicate information, to communicate accurate information with respect to the perils of having infrastructure, communications infrastructure, in the hands of nation states that don't protect freedoms and rights, as do we.
Okay. Well, I think though, if some of our allies are not willing to, protect their vulnerabilities like we are, especially with Huawei, we should maybe be a little more careful in the future deciding what we're going to share with them, just because we don't need the enemy knowing what we know.